Hip, hip, hooray for DNA. It provides the key to the plans for making everything in you and me.
Welcome to one of the past HSC exam question videos. What we're going to do in this video, we're going to cover this exam question, which comes from the Blueprint of Life module, and more specifically the inheritance chapter of the Blueprint of Life module. So I'll read the actual question in a second. Once I read the question, you get about 5 seconds to pause the video. Once you pause the video, attempt the question, and then press play when you're done. The question itself is: a plant breeder replicated one of Mendel's pea plant breeding experiments. The results of the cross between green and yellow pods are shown in the table below. List all possible genotypes of the F2 generation. That's worth 1 mark. Use your understanding of current genetic thinking. Interpret the results of the F2 cross depicted. This here. And C. Describe the 2 features of the experimental techniques used by Mendel that led to success. That's worth 3 marks as well. Obviously here we have that table. Generation F1, F2, pod color, green, capital G, yellow, small g. We've got 632 for F1, 0 for F1 for green, for yellow, sorry. And F2 is green has 1560 and yellow has 482. So when ready, pause the video and attempt the question. Welcome back. Alright, so the first one just says list all the possible genotypes of the F2 generation. So if you remember here we had our heterozygous, the F1 generation in Mendel's experiment was the heterozygous generation, so that meant we had two heterozygous ones. And when we crossed them, we ultimately got a dominant, a homozygous green, and we got 2 heterozygous green, and we got 1 homozygous white. So which genotypes did we get? Well, we had the 2 Gs, the small g and the big G, and the 2 small g's. That's what were our genotypes. That's what I wrote. Possible genotypes of F2 generation are big G, small g, and small g. And that gets you a mark, just saying that. Then for B, use understanding of current genetic thinking to interpret the results of the F2 cross depicted. So we need to figure out how we've gotten that 3:1 phenotype ratio, or the 1 to 2 to 1 genotype ratio. And in our answer, we should mention sort of dominance and recessiveness, and how that helps us to get to that 3:1 ratio. And obviously that will be worth 3 marks, so we have to do a bit of talking or a bit of writing. So first what I mentioned is how we got to that F1 generation. And that's important because then we know that they're actually heterozygous. So the F1 generation produced only green plants, as the parental plants were all homozygous green and yellow. So one parent was green and one parent was yellow, but they were homozygous. So the F1 generation were therefore all heterozygous, and the G allele dominated over the big G allele dominated over the small G allele, so the green dominated over yellow, and therefore was expressed. So therefore all of them were, in the F1 generation, they were all green, even though they had a yellow allele in their genotype. Their phenotype was all green. But then we crossed the F1 generation with each other to get the F2 generation. So what I wrote then is, when the heterozygous F1 generation was crossed, the 3:1 ratio, green to yellow phenotype ratio, was observed due to the random assortment of alleles. So through that random assortment, each one getting 1 randomly, either from either one of those 2 alleles, we would get that 3:1 ratio. And I would actually recommend just to draw a Punnett square of that. That's our Punnett square, just to show the marker how you can get that 3:1 ratio. So here we have one parent which is heterozygous and the other parent which is also heterozygous, and then we end up having 1 dominant, 1 homozygous green, 2 heterozygous green, and 1 homozygous yellow. And again, this just shows the marker that you know how this is possible, how you can get green and yellow appearing in that 3:1 ratio due to 2 heterozygous being crossed. that's worth you 3 marks. So you'll get a mark for just quickly going through what the F1 generation actually is. So the F1 generation are your heterozygous ones. And then you get 2 marks overall for saying that if we cross the F1 generation, we will get F2 generation, which has that 3:1 ratio. And then you obviously explained it through that dominance as well. So making sure you mention the dominance and how small 2 capital G's would be our homozygous recessive. Alright, so C, describe the features of 2 experimental techniques used by Mendel that led to success. So it's worth 3 marks. So you'll probably get 1.5 marks for mentioning a experimental technique and saying how that led to success, because you have to do 2. So each will be worth 1.5 marks. So there are quite a few, but the ones I mentioned were 2 experimental techniques that led to success were a large sample size, which increased the reliability through repetition. So large sample size was one of the techniques. And why did it lead to success? Because that increased the reliability through repetition. So that gets you 1.5 marks. And the other one would be just mentioning another one. So he also extensively relied on calculations, which helped him observe the 3:1 ratio for his monohybrid experiment and helped him gather evidence for his hypothesis. So without those calculations, he wouldn't have realized there was a 3:1 ratio, which was constantly appearing for all his different types of experiments. And yeah, that was his actual experimental technique, his calculations. But then that helped him obviously to give him a really good understanding of what was actually happening. So that is your other 1.5 marks. We said that calculations and large sample size, these were 2 techniques, and then quickly described how they are useful when it comes to his success. So that's overall, that's 3 out of 3. So where these questions come from, they come from these dot points. Distinguish between the homozygous and heterozygous genotypes in monohybrid crosses, and describe outcomes of monohybrid crosses involving simple dominance using Mendel explanations. So this was A and B, came from these 2 dot points. And then C, so C came from describe the aspect of experimental techniques used by Mendel that led to success. So more or less, the question itself is the dot point itself. I hope that was useful.
Thank you for watching.